Liz Cheney has been officially kicked out of Republican leadership. She's been kicked out. The reason she was kicked out is because she questioned the dear leader and said that on January 6th, what he did was totally inappropriate. He was egging on an insurrection or a coup, and we can't sit idly by as he lies and lies and lies about the election being stolen when it was not stolen. That's why she's being kicked out. So apparently, when the votes came in and it was clear that she was being kicked out, she started to talk, and at first there were boos, but then everybody quieted down, and then at the end of what she said, there was a standing ovation. This Republican Party doesn't know whether it's coming or going. It doesn't know what it even stands for. It's, as Noam Chomsky says, it's barely a political party at all. Like, it doesn't act like a political party. It really acts like a fringe cult group. It's off the spectrum. That's another thing he says all the time. So anyway, here's Liz Cheney's speech last night. She wanted this to be on the record before she was kicked out.
God has blessed America, Mr. Speaker, but our freedom only survives if we protect it, if we honor our oath taken before God in this chamber to support and defend the Constitution, if we recognize threats to freedom when they arise. Today, we face a threat America has never seen before. A former president who provoked a violent attack on this Capitol in an effort to steal the election has resumed his aggressive effort to convince Americans that the election was stolen from him. He risks inciting further violence. Millions of Americans have been misled by the former president. They have heard only his words, but not the truth, as he continues to undermine our democratic process, sowing seeds of doubt about whether democracy really works at all. I am a conservative Republican, and the most conservative of conservative principles is reverence for the rule of law. The Electoral College has voted. More than 60 state and federal courts, including multiple judges the former president appointed, have rejected his claims. The Trump Department of Justice investigated the former president's claims of widespread fraud and found no evidence to support them. The election is over. That is the rule of law. That is our constitutional process. Those who refuse to accept the rulings of our courts are at war with the Constitution. Our duty is clear. Every one of us who has sworn the oath must act to prevent the unraveling of our democracy. This is not about policy. This is not about partisanship. This is about our duty as Americans. Remaining silent and ignoring the lie emboldens the liar. I will not participate in that. I will not sit back and watch in silence while others lead our party down a path that abandons the rule of law and joins the former president's crusade to undermine our democracy. As the party of Reagan, Republicans have championed democracy, won the Cold War, and defeated the Soviet communists. Today, America is on the cusp of another Cold War, this time with communist China. Attacks against our democratic process and the rule of law empower our adversaries and feed communist propaganda that American democracy is a failure. We must speak the truth.
So let's get one thing out of the way. This is easy. This is obvious. This is a layup. Is Liz Cheney correct on this narrow, specific issue that the election wasn't stolen? This has gone through various procedures, and the conclusion is overwhelming and damning. She's correct about that. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. There's been over 60 court cases. I believe the Trump side lost every single court case except one, and that one was on like procedural nonsense. The others were more on the meat of the issue as to whether or not the election was stolen. There's even conservative Republican judges that took a look at the evidence and said, this is ridiculous. Of course, this election isn't stolen. We have to side with Biden. We have no choice. Or they threw it out because there's no standing. They're making ridiculous stretched legal arguments. I mean, honestly, it was absurd. And so Trump's either a complete liar or he's a dupe, and he bought into the propaganda of insane conspiracy theorists who twist everything to try to fit the narrative of the dear leader and to try to make him feel like a victim. So, I mean, there's no doubt Liz Cheney is correct about this. None whatsoever. There's also no doubt that whether or not you could take legal action against Trump over January 6th, that January 6th was terrible. You know, you had the storming of the Capitol from hardcore Trump supporters, and yes, there was violence, and you could call it a riot of sorts, and people call it either a coup or an insurrection or an attempted coup or an attempted insurrection. I think the kindest interpretation you can give, and this is the one that I've given many times, is that it was basically like a diet coup or a diet insurrection. And the reason I say diet is because it had zero chance of success, because you had no high-ranking officials in the military or whatever who were like on their side, who were just waiting to like take out the right people. But yeah, imagine if that mob of people had found Mike Pence when at that moment they were blaming Mike Pence for what happened. Imagine if they found Mitt Romney when they despised Mitt Romney. You know, people who are angry and violent and storming the Capitol like that. I mean, many people have made this point, but I think it's accurate. If that was Black Lives Matter that was storming the Capitol like that, I think there would have been people dead on the ground. Now, I don't think that's the right solution, whether it's Black Lives Matter or the people who did it, the far-right Trump supporters, but it does show you a little bit of a, you know, there's a little bit of kid glove situation going on with them to a certain extent. So, so she's right about all that stuff. But, and this stuff is so important. Why at the end of that does she start red baiting? And why at the end of that does she try to, you know, lean into the new Cold War and this time make it with communist China? And the reason why we need to believe these things is because we don't want communist China to take over. So even in the context of saying something true, she has to like be a neocon war hawk. She has to also lie and say stuff like Reagan championed democracy. Reagan didn't champion fucking democracy. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? The legacy of the United States during the Cold War is us overthrowing democratically elected governments and putting in dictators to serve our corporate interests. It's not championing democracy. That's what we pretend as we do those things. We pretend like overthrowing leftist governments is like overthrowing dictators and putting democracy in place, but we all know it's not democracy because the long list of dictators we supported is a matter of historical fact. Go look at the record. Reagan didn't support democracy. But of course, the worst part, and she says this a number of times throughout the speech, she basically says, I'm a true conservative, and part of conservatism is reverence for the rule of law. That's all I want. That's all I'm standing up for. That's all I care about. The oldest conservative principle is following rule of law. That's what I'm about. Liz Cheney is a war criminal. She violates the ultimate law. International human rights laws. The United Nations, the Geneva Convention, the Nuremberg Tribunal. She's the kind of person who says, no, we are allowed, the United States is allowed to do whatever we want, wherever we want to in the world. If we want to invade a country and overthrow a government with zero evidence or zero direct threat of attack from them against us, we're allowed to do it because we're the world's sole superpower. We're the world's policemen. So we effectively get to do whatever we want. And what we do is the law. I'm going to redefine the law as whatever I do. Well, guess what? That's exactly what Trump does. Right? That's what Trump does. Yeah, oh, the law is what I say it is, and I say the election was stolen, so anything that's done to justify me staying in power is okay. That is the law. That's what Trump does. Bends the law, twists the law to suit his perspective and his views and his narrative. Liz Cheney does that same shit, but she does it when it comes to foreign policy. Well, so does Trump when it comes to foreign policy too, by the way. There's plenty of things he did that were in violation of international law. Blockading medicine from going in to Iran, even though the International Criminal Court said, you have to let the medicine in. He said, no, I don't. But continuing the wars, Trump did do that. And again, that's in violation of international law. But Liz Cheney is like the number one neocon warmonger imperialist in Congress. And so the whole thing about like, we believe in law and order, you believe in violating the ultimate law and order. I mean, these are defenders of torture. It's not an open question as to whether or not torture is legal or illegal. Of course it's illegal. It's illegal under international law. It's illegal under U.S. law. But she supported torture. Her dad is like the number one war criminal on the planet. I mean, these are people who lied us into war and then tortured to cover it up. So I don't want to hear anything about rule of law from Liz Cheney. She doesn't believe in rule of law. She believes in it when it's convenient to her. And so if any other, stop and think about this. If any other country acted internationally like the U.S. does, she would immediately call for that country to be overthrown. She would immediately call for that country to be overthrown. And she would say the country is ripe for regime change, but when we do it, it's okay and you can shut up. Because, again, she doesn't believe in rule of law. Anybody who truly believes in rule of law and law and order, anybody, would be deeply against torture, deeply against illegal, unconstitutional NSA spying, which is another thing that she supports, deeply against all of our wars of aggression, our endless wars of aggression. She supports all those things. So I don't want to hear it. And final thing is this. She voted with Trump over 90% of the time. Basically, almost one of her only disagreements with Trump is this. Hey, the election wasn't stolen. That's one of her only disagreements with Trump. The person who's supposed to replace Liz Cheney in this leadership position voted with Trump like 77% of the time or something like that. So Liz Cheney is actually more of a Trumpist than the person who's supposed to replace Liz Cheney. So, in other words, Democrats should not all of a sudden, drool all over themselves and think that Liz Cheney is awesome because of this. Because you're silly if that's the case. You're silly. You really, honestly, you shouldn't support either one. Don't support Trump. Don't support Liz Cheney. Don't support Stefanik or whatever her name is, the one who's supposed to replace Liz Cheney. They're all terrible in slightly different ways, and it's okay to say that.